strange. You had me so confused the way you chop and change. So strange, my darling, you're so strange. You give me love and deprive me of it, you're so strange. Have mercy on me, baby, because it's a crying shame. Everything I own I would give Ladies and gentlemen, here's the latest disco smash from the Vipers, and it's called Playing the Game. But what can you say if you look through?
Wow. No. 1, 2. Fantastic. It's Sunday night. So naturally, you're all in a music venue. Probably the only person who could get us all out on a Sunday night would be Dave Moloney. I'm Michael Murphy. I run these evenings with Niall McGurk. And a couple of years ago, we were doing two things. Number one, we thought there are really important cultural stories of our country that aren't being told. And for Niall and myself, we've spent our entire lives going to gigs. And the gigs that we were fortunate to be able to go and see were enabled by, and we feel this very strongly, a generation of revolutionaries. And I include everyone who's going to be speaking tonight in that. And everyone who's here probably knows someone who was speaking. But Ireland was backward. We didn't have a live music industry because of the Troubles. Bands were terrified to come here. The Miami Massacre then stopped anything that was happening. And then a guy called Paul Charles got together with people like Ian Wilson, Elvira Butler, ENTS officers from around the country, and said, we're going to bring new bands to this country. It's not right. We shouldn't be cut off. And new bands came and they played. And bands like the Stranglers, who to me are a really big band, said, no, we're not going there because we'll get killed. They're Irish. They're savages. They'll skin us. I'm thinking, you're the Stranglers. You're meant to be tough. But they were afraid to come over. So they said to Paul Charles, we'll only come if you hold our hand, if you come with us. So he did. He went on every gig to make sure they were safe, and they realised this is fantastic. And then it spiralled into what is now one of the most successful live music industries in any country in the world. But it's thanks to the revolutionaries, including Dave, who decided that they'd put on leather jackets with badges that they probably stole from the Dandelion Market, or maybe they paid for them if Ferdy McKenna was looking in their direction. So Niall and myself are just documenting these stories. We go around the country and we talk to people about what they did, what inspired them, and the role that they played. So we do that. We normally do them on a Monday night. And when, it's difficult talking, to be honest, about Dave, because to me, he's a living part of our culture. He's an important part of our culture. So it's upsetting for everyone that he's not with us anymore. But we were approached by Robert and by Phil, and they said, would you do one of these nights to commemorate Dave? And we said, of course we will. But it means it's a Sunday. It's a slightly different one. If you ever come back to any of our other chats, you won't have this audio-visual extravaganza. This is one night only, people. So I just thought that we would start the night just by, I was thinking of a couple of moments of silence, but this wasn't a man who lived for silence. This was a man who was a party, even if he was sitting at the back of the bus. So I just thought we'd do a round of applause and raise the roof for a really missed part of our culture. So let's give it up. And there were two things that Dave liked, from my experience with him. One is he loved talking, and number two was he loved people talking about him. So tonight is all about the memories of the moment. But we're going to start with something that's very important, and it's also a reminder that we've got to capture these stories. These people's stories are so important. So we're going to start tonight with a film. An interview that Pete did with his uncle, and I was his lecturer at the time, and he said, I want to do like a project, is it okay? And he probably had 6 other ideas before, and it was probably the night before the deadline, if it's the way I remember it. I said, what's your new idea? He said, I want to do it on my uncle. And I thought, that sounds like such a crap idea. And I said, well, who's your uncle? I said, he was in a band. Michael, you wouldn't have heard of them. I think, okay, challenge accepted. And he said, it's the Vipers. I said, okay, you can do the project for sure, but make sure you get it in. So here, I think this is a fantastic piece because it's 2 human beings talking, and we're going to run this, and then we'll start the chat. So here's Pete's film with the man himself.
Well, as we all know, you're well known for being in the Vipers, Boomtown Rats and the likes. Mm-hmm. What was it like getting started in Ireland?
Not very easy. I think probably the Rats and the Radiators, well, probably Till Lizzie before them, kicked open a few doors, and then the Rats and the Radiators followed through after that. I used to go and see the Rats in Moran's Hotel, destroying the place, and I thought, I had been rehearsing with a jazz rock band called No Buckets, like played 20-minute instrumentals, and then I saw the Rats in Moran's Hotel. I thought, this is more like what I want to do. Drink, rock and roll. I thought that'll do for me. And then having seen them, 2-3 times in Moran's Hotel, I actually saw an ad in the old Evening Press, now defunct. and rang this number, and a voice on the other end said, "How are you? My name's Geldof. I'm not very good at this kind of thing. Not very good at this kind of thing. We're looking for a drummer." Actually, the ad in the evening press said "White punk on drums wanted for rock band," which was in deference to, was it the Tubes at the time? A band called the Tubes had an album now called "White Punks on Dope" or something like that. So I auditioned for the Rats with 12 other people I think it was, and I got the audition, and I was rehearsed with them for a couple of months and travelled around with them, and got a phone call. I actually think it was on Mike's birthday, the 17th of December one year. Faulkner O'Kelly, their manager, rang me up and said, "Howdy Dave, Simon's decided he's coming back. Apparently he was going to go off and do a cabaret duet with his girlfriend." My theory is that he found out before me that they were signing a record deal.
Alright,
so the worst thing Faulkner could have said was, "If there's ever that we can do for you, don't hesitate to call." So when that happened, I answered another ad in the paper. Someone wanted to form a band like the Boomtown Rats, so myself and a guy called Paul Boyle formed the Vipers. So having rehearsed with them, we then saw again the evening press front page one night, "Boomtown Rats signed $1 million deal." It was like, bollocks. And so I rang them, had all their numbers, so I rang them up and said their first British tour was coming up. So I rang them up and said, "Hi lads, Dave, how's it going?" And I said, "Grand, yeah, new band together, the Vipers, yeah. Guess who's supporting you on your British tour?" And they said, "Oh, go on." So we got that tour, and then via that tour we got introduced to Phil Lynott, and we ended up doing the Black Rose tour in 1979, supporting Thin Lizzy, which was, I think, 32 dates over 7 weeks or something. It was mayhem. Actually, we were told by, and I think it was actually late Phil Chevron, God bless him, they had done a support tour with Lizzy, and we were told, "You're about to meet the biggest bollocks you're ever going to meet in your life," which was Phil Lynott. And we turned up late for the first night, as luck would have it, in Portsmouth. And their road manager was standing in the car park looking at his watch. Too late, we've a local band on, and Phil Lynott appeared with the ubiquitous large, I think it was Bacardi and Coke. "Howdy lads, bit late." I think the tour manager's name was John Salter, and Lynott goes, "Get those fuckers off, the lads are here." And we were like, "Great," but the Lizzy audience was already in, so they had to take their gear off, and we had to set up in front of a partisan Lizzy
Kinda
crowd
daunting.
going, we're like, just be a sec. I think we got bottled off at least once on that tour, after which, and I wish we had let him fill in, it said, "What I'll do for you is I'll make a tape saying these are me mates from Dublin that we could play beforehand. I wish we got it recorded." And we said, "Oh no, well, we're better than that. We can take it."
Yeah.
Gobshites. I mean, what would that be worth now?
Yeah, fortune.
Here's my mates from Dublin called the Vipers. But he did all sorts for us. One night he came in. One night he knew we were skint, and he said as much to us. And he says, "We're playing Manchester the next 2 nights. You can stay in my ma's place. I've checked it out." Because Philomena Lynott used to have a hotel or bed and breakfast in Manchester.
Yeah.
So he got us put up for 2 nights there. I've spoken to her since, and she said, "Yeah, you and everyone else, apparently anyone who was anyone that filling it you stayed in his ma's hotel in Manchester." One night he came into our dressing room and asked for one of our badges. We'd got badges made up,
Yeah.
one of which I have somewhere. And we were like, "Oh yeah, great, Phil wearing one of our badges, fantastic." We didn't anything out of it. A couple of nights later we turned up somewhere, walked in, and I think we decided to walk in the front door this night because we were getting fairly well known. So we decided to walk in the front door. We knew all the lads on the busy merchandising stand. "Howdy lads, grand, good to see you, blah blah." And all of a sudden up on the wall was like 40 Vipers t-shirts, and we're like, "Did you?" No, it wasn't me. Our manager at the time did. No, roadie, like no one knew what the fuck was going on. So we went up to the dressing room, and Linnet walks in. Do you like your new t-shirts, lads? We're like, this is the biggest bollocks we're ever going to make in your lives. He says, yeah, you can keep it. If you sell any of them, you can keep the profits. I know you're a bit stuck for cash. It's like...
Sound of him, yeah.
I got you. I got you. I got you.
So, well, I have to say, listening to stuff like Soft Machine and Mahavishnu Orchestra, I definitely learned how to, I mean, I taught myself how to play the drums.
Yeah.
And listening to that stuff, you really had to know how to get around a drum kit, you know. But I'm more into 3 or 4 minute rock songs or pop songs or whatever, you know. Beginning, middle, end, rather than just, as I call it, musical masturbation. I'm brilliant. Yeah, we know you're brilliant. You don't keep proving it to us every 2 seconds of every song. And so the shed at the bottom of my mother's garden was empty, so after what I told you about when I answered the ad, this guy Paul Boyle wanted to form a band. We formed the Vipers, and I thought, great. Well, we've ready-made rehearsal room. So we immediately moved in there, to the annoyance of most of our neighbours.
So you said you taught yourself the drums?
Yeah.
How would you do that?
I bought first drum kit, evening press again. I know a lot of the evening press. I bought a second-hand drum kit for 25 punts, which was a conglomeration of an Ajax and a Perro kit and a couple of cracked cymbals. And what I did was, probably why I failed the Leaving Cert, it was actually the first day of my last year at school. And every day for a solid year, what I did was I'd put all my favourite albums on and put a pair of headphones on so I could hear the music, and drums were so loud you could hear them over the background, so I just played along to all my favourite music and learned what it's, oh, there's an interesting roll, but you'd have to, in those days you couldn't rewind, it was just lift the needle and put it back so there.
Yeah.
Listen to that again, figure out how he did that.
That's class.
So I learned. Like, I can't, even to this day, I can't read music or speak drums, like, you know. You should put a paradiddle in there. Oh, I'll put a fucking steak and kidney pie in there if you want. I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. It's like, I'm of the old school, you hum it, I'll play it brigade.
That's
If I hear it once or twice, I could usually master it. The place, John Murray, who's dead now, he's dead a long time, he used to run the Dublin Drum Centre on Camden Street. I used to go in there and buy my sticks and whatever. So I said, well, I should get some lessons from you. And he says, why? Do you enjoy playing? I said, I love playing. He says, well, why do you want lessons? Because I don't know what this is called or that's called. Or... He says, well, why do you want to learn that? He said, if you come in here and get lessons from me, you're going to sound like me. Why would you want to sound like me if you're happy playing the way you're playing?
Yeah.
So I never got lessons. And I can't give lessons because I can't speak drum either. Like, what's that
Smack
called?
that
I have
hard.
no idea. Hit it harder, yeah.
Yeah. So you're saying you are skint, so there wasn't much money in the industry then when you were playing around now? It was just for enjoyment?
I mean, I think we used to get like 10 punts for a gig between 4 or 5 of us, you know.
Yeah.
And you'd have to get there, and I mean, picked up after that. Like, actually made more money with a mad band like the Cajun Kings in the 90s.
Yeah.
I'd be doing 6-7 gigs a week for, like, you know, corporate dues and all this stuff, playing complete shite. I mean, everyone was a good musician, if I can include myself, but they were all very, like Paul Cleary from the Blades and Colin McCarthy, Sean Garvey, everyone had been in.
Were you getting fairly well known in Ireland, like? What was that like? Because people still to this day know who you are. Like, I say, oh yeah, my uncle Dave Moloney, they're like,
Yeah. I know, I used to, like, late 70s, the girl I was with, walking down Grafton Street, and every second person said hello, and she actually said to me once, do you know fucking everyone in Dublin? I said, no, just, you'd be in the papers every other day, you know, for wrecking some place or other. So we did get fairly well known, sometimes for all the wrong reasons, but we did play music as well, occasionally.
yeah, it sounds like a fun time to be involved in anyways.
Oh, absolutely. My 21st birthday, I did a lunchtime gig in Belfield at UCD. Got arseholes drunk, did a sound check in McGonigal's in town, got drunk again, went back, did the gig, can't remember a thing about it. but I just presume it went well.
Probably destroyed there as well.
So that's kind of the way it went.
Sounds good.
Oh, there's a million stories.
I'm sure there is a million that can't go on camera as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's gone well over the 5 minutes. Where did they check?
I think that's loads.
Okay.
Thank you for doing that. Thank you very much.
Unaccustomed as I am.
Yes, so we're off. Obviously we've seen the man himself, speak about his career, but in his usual, funny way. But just to set the scene, Robert, was there music in your house when you were growing up, or was it something that you learned late in life?
Endlessly music, yeah. Parents were always having parties that were always musical. Now, the music was dubious. It was light opera and show tunes. But, I did a thing for Willie a couple of years ago, and at the end of it they said, well, so do you like opera now? I said, no, not at all, but it was very enjoyable, thanks very much. So we grew up with lots of opera, yeah.
But you were open, I know I had a similar situation where, you listened to whatever was there, because there weren't that many records.
Oh, yeah.
And when did you start kind of developing your own taste or buying records?
That very much came from Dave. So I had the beauty of being off all summer, and he'd be out at work or away, and mother would be gone out to work, and I'd get up and there would be television screen by the radiators, Dr. Feelgood Stupidity, and bliss. So that's where it came from, yeah. But Dave Edmunds was the first rock and roll record that was in the house. So, I Hear You Knocking, brilliant. So that was the start of it.
Fantastic. And then you go from records to gigs. We had Marcus from UCD who put on the Belfield's Burning gig. So live music wasn't far away from you. When did you start going to gigs?
My first ever gig was the Vipers and McGonagals the day they left the country. So it was the matinee there. But we sat on the end wall at the end of our garden listening to the Vipers rehearsals. So there were a couple of households of neighbours sitting on the wall at the end of the garden, all the same vintage, including my dear wife, of course. And we just it was brilliant. Your own show every day, And then I got introduced to Phil Byrne as well. That's another story. He'll tell you that one later.
I was going to ask now, but while we have it here, what kind of bloke was your brother? We just knew him as a guy who'd be very nice to us because we were younger and we were into music. But what was the personality like?
Oh yeah, I mean, infuriating in a lot of ways. I did ask him in recent years what happened to the punk, and he went, "You're a glass half full person. I'm not." I said, your glass is usually fairly full when I'm around you. So, you've met the elder brother as well, have you? So, it was a loud household. So when people used to say, "Why are you so quiet, Dave?" He'd go, when in actual fact, of course, he was the loudest of us all. But yeah, so he was he'd infuriate the mother. "What are you doing? I'm going out." "Where are you going?" "Out." I said to him one time, "Why don't you talk to her?" He said, "No, every time I talk to her, it just involves another 100 questions and justifying my actions. So, out." And that's the way he would be. And Mike tells a great story as well about one time when there was an alarm raised. No one could find the baby Dave. Disappeared off the face of the earth. Hours later, searches, and his grandfather from Lancashire sits there and go, "Did anyone check his bed?" And there he was, Dave was asleep. So if all else failed, Dave just went to bed. Just nothing. And he kept that up for the rest of his life. Annoy him enough. Where's Dave? Gone to bed.
And so where did you see his music where it wasn't just a passing fancy, like it was, this has
that
gone to
obsession with the drum kit. And as he said in one of those interviews, how did the parents ever let him get a drum kit? But I think the two of them were basically punk rockers in middle-class suburban Irish Catholic clothing, you know. And like Dad's last words to him were, "Do you need anything for your drum kit?" Like, you know, so like they were behind it all. Or the mother, you know, "I don't know where I got you all from." "Oh, we've a fairly good idea." So so there was always music. There was always something happening. The drum kit. Like that first kit he talked about, he dismantled every single bit of it. Now, our grandfather had been British Army radio officer, and he made clocks, dismantled clocks. Dave dismantled that drum kit the same way he would have done a clock. Every nut and bolt. And then he got Blue Peter project and sticky back plastic, covered it all in black and all that, you know. So that was it then, you know. And then if only the Leaving Cert had a section on the New Musical Express, he would have been an A student, you know. There's actually just what I think with Belvedere, of course. He had a very good education, you know, and that's education is what's left when you forget everything you've learned, because, well, he forgot everything he learned. But apparently he was very good with a tomato sandwich. And I haven't been in Belvedere, thank God. But apparently there's a stairwell, and at the bottom of the stairwell, from the third floor or wherever, there's a sort of a star or a cross or something. So he reckoned he could hit that with a tomato sandwich. He would have hit it with a tomato sandwich if it wasn't for the head priest walking right into that spot just as it smashed down on his head. So mischief was always there, but the music was, he was always into music. And like the astounding one is things like 1812 Overture. We all loved that, you know, but that was one of his things as well, you know. I think Johnny Lappin tried to get him to do a drumming version of it.
So the fight back against the Catholic Church, we know where it began. Like the first salvo was that tomato sandwich. You know.
Yeah, Belvedere. He says in one of the interviews or somewhere that he never had trouble in Belvedere. You know, despite, he says he knows people who went through horrendous problems and now this whole abuse thing, but he said he never had any trouble. You know.
But that, I'm fascinated that engineering mindset was in your DNA, you know, from a couple of generations before.
Yeah.
And, you know, was there any connection with England? Like, did you ever go over there?
Oh, we were always there because my mother's father was, as I say, he arrived here in 1919 as a British radio officer and never went home. Now, he may have been avoiding some financial issues in Manchester as well, but that's another story.
He wouldn't be a Moloney if there wasn't some kind of backstory.
There's no one listening anyway.
Yeah. Live stream. And then you see him on stage. Like, what was that like? You know, you're a young fella, and
but I was thinking about this over the last week as well. I remember being in Our Lady's Grove Babies or High Babies, and my mother will come and collect me every day at lunchtime. And then one day, this vision in the sunshine on his blue bike comes to collect me. And that's what seeing him play was like. But also I loved what he played. Generally, he played really good stuff. And I studied what he did. I had no intention. That wasn't for me. That was what he did. But it was just the intensity he brought to it as well. And then seeing him having rows with people. When he started with the Rhythm Kings, they used to enjoy like a nice little chat between songs. That all stopped. They very soon learned that it was all going to start again very soon. You know, so I loved what he did. And he said one thing to me that I didn't get him to explain. He said we were watching some drummer somewhere, and he said he's a great drummer, but he doesn't drive the band on. So I've never actually got that explained. What did he mean by drives the band on? So we'll never know. Yeah,
but he was aware of his place, and you know the drummer driving it on. It's like Topper in the Clash, where you're not just keeping the rhythm, you're actually kind of pushing them a little bit, you know, which makes it thrilling for an audience member, even though you can't see quite what's going on.
There's someone, I'm not sure if they're here, it was who said it, I'll check with them later, but apparently he was playing with Johnny Logan, and into the dressing room afterwards comes the promoter going, "Oh, Jesus, Johnny, the band were fantastic." And Johnny Logan loved him to bits, but he would have gone, No, I was great. My band were great. Yes, you were. But what your man said to him was, he said, "But Dave, your drummer followed everything you did for an hour and a half. He never took his eye off you. He watched what you were doing and how you were lifting the stage. It's not a fire alarm, we're all right."
That's what you think.
The meters run out.
Yeah, but that is the time. So these conversations, they're deliberately quick. We could do an hour with any of the guests, and I'm so delighted that I finally got to meet you. But this is an invitation for everyone here to think about, am I documenting my culture? Am I asking the people who were there? Yeah. And, just on that note, I'd like to acknowledge Jude Carr, who a lot of you might know, who is a huge inspiration to Niall and myself from the fanzine side of things, and the Purdy brothers, who've been really supportive.
Say hello to the Purdy brothers.
Yeah, but just in that determination of document the stuff, record the stuff. Yeah. So, you're now part of it, and thank you for everything you've done.
Well, that's what we want to do over the next 6 months as well, is really gather all that stuff together, including myself, Ken Sweeney, and Dave Sweeney, and Brian had talked over the years about getting the Vipers recordings together. So we'll make that happen in the next 6 months as well.
You heard it here. So thanks very much.
Thanks.
And now Ross and Ian, when you're ready. Or even if you're not. Over that side, whichever suits.
Great to see you all. Surprised so many of you are still alive.
Yeah, on that cheery note. So again, I'm delighted. I feel very privileged to get to talk to people while we're doing these things. But I'm a historian by trade, and the music industry of Ireland is my special area. So one of the things you do if you're writing about the Irish music industry, you go through hot press, you go through all the back issues, you'll see some names, you'll see some gigs that took place. And that's about 10%. There's so much else that went on. And the deeper you go, you realise that the universities completely transformed this country. And I don't mean that they just gave people an education, but a lot of the students probably remember more from their college days of what they did outside of the lectures. So, Ross, can I start with you? Like, when you rocked up to third level, was music your main passion, or did something happen to inspire you?
It was a big passion. I mean, my first gig was Roy Orbison at the Adelphi. I was 10, and I just couldn't believe it. It blew my mind. And I think I ended up running a gig at school. We had 400 people for Mark Costigan and the Trench Band, and that would have been sort of 73, 74, my last year in school. And I went to every gig I could. I went to see Rory Gallagher a few times, saw Thin Lizzy a few times, and saw as many local bands as I could, Jimmy Slevin and everybody else, and loved it. And started going to gigs, which I soon realised a couple of years later when I went to Trinity, that Ian and his colleagues were putting together in Trinity, in the exam hall and in other venues in the college. So it was a very exciting thing to be part of. And in fact, I don't know if Ian remembers this, but I had a year between school and college, and I remember going into Trinity one night to some event, I can't remember what it was, and coming out through front gate, I met Ian and Paul Tipping putting up posters for a gig, which they were running, and that was the first time we met. Yeah.
Right, so you get to Trinity and you see that there are people like Ian and Bill Graham beforehand, yes, was involved. And where did you decide to get involved? Like to move from being an audience member to thinking, I want to take part?
I asked, I think it was Kieran Owens was probably the ENS officer in my first year. And I went in to see Kieran Owens in the student union and I said, can I help? Because I had that school experience. I'd already been a DJ. I was a DJ from about 14. And therefore, I wanted to be in that scene. I felt like going to university was something I had to do, but it wasn't really what I wanted to pursue. The music scene you talk about that we helped to create, it didn't exist. And therefore there was nothing to latch on to or to say, yes, that's a company I could join, or there was nothing like that. Obviously we knew of, Rory had gone to London, Thin Lizzy had gone to London. We knew there were people working with those artists. And you mentioned Paul Charles, who I think you probably put on Frupp with Paul Charles or something like that. Would have been a first experience with Paul.
Oh, no. My experience with Paul goes back a long, long way.
Before that even.
Oh,
maybe.
1973 I would have started. When we first started trying to get bands into Ireland, I sussed out Paul Charles at some stage. And we ended up, as I said, with this working with colleges in the north and UCC. Because as you explained, at the time we'd had bombs in Dublin. I mean, I remember being involved in that. I'm sorry, this is very fucking middle-class Trinity kind of shite. But we...
Well, they paid their money. That's what they're getting.
Okay. Well, you know what you're getting then. Yeah. No, I remember we ran outdoor shows in College Park long before MCD did or anything like that. Free shows during the summer. And I remember, fortunately, it was an off day. It was a day we didn't have a gig on. I remember the bombs going off all over Dublin that day, and walking out and walking out the back of Trinity and seeing just bits of people everywhere. And the Trinity Ball was 3 days after that, and every fucking band coming in, that was it. And that was followed by the Miami, and that was the end of it. There was no more touring acts in Ireland whatsoever. And end of story. Nobody would cross the water. And so we ended up, we'd already got this tentative connection with Paul Charles, so we ended up, basically we said to them, the only place you're going to be able to play a gig in Ireland is inside the colleges. It's just not safe outside. We know these are neutral territories. None of the paramilitaries at any stage ever got involved on campuses in doing anything for some reason. But Queen's and the Northern Ireland Poly and whatever it's called in Coleraine, the NUU in Coleraine, and so on, they were seemed to be off limits for bombing and general paramilitary activities. So we were able to put together a touring system that bands could afford to come in from abroad and make 3 or 4 gigs in Ireland, make it worth their time. There's a very hungry audience out there, but there were no commercial promoters at that stage. I mean, Jim Aiken, who was Peter Aiken's father, as in Aiken Promotions, I mean, he did what he could, but basically nothing. Dennis Desmond, who runs MCD, he was also in UCC promoter and booking bands as well. So it was, the only action was in the colleges. And then punk happened. And that was a whole different ball game, because all of a sudden people came out of the woodwork and they all started playing gigs everywhere. And it was a whole different thing. And especially in the north, which was a huge hive of activity going on in Northern Ireland in 77 and so on. Again, completely unexpected. So, and a complete diversion to what you thought was going on. So,
I do remember an early gig, which is quite important, and I mentioned it to Pete earlier. You and I and Paul Tipping and various other people went to a party in Bray on a Saturday night, and we stayed over in the house. It was a very late night. And the Sunday afternoon, 4 p.m., the Starlight Hotel in Bray. And I said to everybody at lunchtime, I know there's this band, the Radiators from Space. They're playing in the Starlight Hotel. We all have to go, because it's important we see this band. We were already alive to the punk scene in London and from the music press and John Peel and so forth. But that gig blew our minds. And we said that was really the moment where I think it's fair to say we all agreed that we needed to bring these bands to Trinity and to the other universities.
Okay, and just to put it, I know no one in their right mind would go to Bray now, but but there was a time where there would be 2,000 people outside the venue. Yeah. You know, in the show band eras, so Irish people wanted to go out and dance. They wanted to go out and have fun. In the mid-1960s, on St. Stephen's Night. St. Stephen's Night was the big dancing night. 750,000 people were out dancing to show bands on that one night. That's 50% of our adult population. There's no other country where entertainment and dancing and socialising. But if you go 30 years before that, it was against the law in this country to hold a dance in your house. If a boy and a girl were caught kissing, the sentence was a month in prison. Now, nothing more than kissing. District Justice Goff in Blackrock County Louth did the test case for that. But take me back to where you got interested in music and kind of youth culture, because you're not from Dublin. Where do you get exposed before you go to university? To the idea that music is fun.
I'd been away at boarding school in England, so I'm good Anglo-Irish stock, you understand, and that's what would have happened to us. We got sent away to boarding school, and then on to Trinity, if not Oxford or Cambridge, yes. But in my case, I probably wasn't smart enough, so I went to Trinity,
And was there any music in boarding school?
Yeah, there was tons of it I came across, because when I went to England, I was in the middle of the blues boom. And all of a sudden, you had all these blues performers. And, I mean, the better-known people you will know, like Savoy Brown and John Mayall and Fleetwood Mac and those. But there's a whole upsurge in sort of rock-based, blues-based rock. And out of that, you got the Yardbirds, and the people called the New Yardbirds, who became Led Zeppelin, and so on and so on. So I was inculcated into all that thing, and people like Cream, and so on. So I was in that whole British sort of rock thing at that stage. So when I came into Trinity, I blundered into the guy who was running the gigs at the time, and he was a medical student, and he'd fucked up his medical course, and he was going to be thrown out. So he duly was thrown out. And because I was the only one standing around who knew anything about music, who was working, they said, "You're doing it." And I started doing it, in 1972.
And who else was around? Like, who do you remember from those days who was active in trying to build a music scene?
Pat Egan, Jim Aiken, as you probably know. There was there was no clubs at this stage. There'd been the beat clubs in the 60s in Dublin, and there really were no clubs in the early 70s. There was a few. There was a meeting place up, and there was a bit in Slattery's, but there was no such thing as music clubs. That, again, came along with the punk thing. You've got to remember, in 1977 or so, the whole music scene in Ireland changed completely. From being nothing going on. It was partly the Rats, the Radiators, and people like this, who changed it all. But it's all suddenly, the lights went on, and it wasn't Dark Ireland anymore. It was a completely different ballgame, I have bands everywhere, I would have had difficulty, when I was running gigs in the 70s, I would have difficulty getting quality Irish acts. We played a lot of jazz and folk, because there wasn't good rock bands, I mean, I was very happy to put on the Chieftains and Paul Brady and the Bothy Band and Planksty. And does anybody remember any of these bands? Yeah. So I mean, you're talking Cream quality stuff, but there wasn't. You could not fill a year in a college with rock bands or music or guitar bands. They just weren't there. When it came to 77, you couldn't. You couldn't swing a fucking shitty stick for somebody with a guitar appearing. It was everywhere,
Yeah, but if you couldn't swing a stick without hitting one, it's because of people like the two of you who decided this stuff is valid, it's exciting. The Irish Times is the first newspaper of record in the world to interview the Clash. So, there's and obviously hot press is coming along. There's a bit of a movement towards, but it's young people like you who decided we're not going to wait for Pat Egan or for Jim Aiken, who tended to do the bigger gigs. He wasn't watching Top of the Pops and thinking, oh, the X-Ray Specs, they look good, I must get them over. So, like, when did punk hit both of you? Ross, what did it feel like?
I think for me, it's like the precursor has to be Dr. Feelgood. Yeah. Absolutely, just the idea that we had got away from 19 minutes of guitar noodling to actually something that happened in 2.5 minutes and was mind-blowing.
Yeah, you had Bees Make Honey, Brinsley Swartz, those kind of bands. So pub rock it was called at the time, which was a very strange term, but it was sort of blues.
They were playing pubs, I guess. Yeah. But Eddie and the Hot Rods were also the suggestion of something kind of edgier coming, something more dangerous. And I think the same thing that was happening was also an expansion of musical interest. I mean, personally, and I think with Ian, with Paul Tipping, who was the ENS officer, 77, 78, and our social circle, we were also listening to a lot of reggae, a lot of funk. So we'd quite a wide view of music.
P-Funk, yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, there's a P-Funk connection to the Vipers, I'll explain in a minute. But...
Parliament, psychedelic, yeah.
But,
George Clinton, okay?
Yeah.
They got all that, yeah? Yeah.
And I think we were determined to do something quite seriously mind-blowing with that 77, 78 season. So we ended up, the Clash was our first gig. We then had the Stranglers, we had the Buzzcocks, we had the Damned, we had the Adverts, we had the Radiators. And in the middle of all that, something interesting happened, which was I had to go to CBS Records and collect an advance copy of the Clash album. That's right. I met Jackie Hayden in CBS Records, who took me around the warehouse. And I said, what are all these records here? And he said, oh, these are all deletions. We can't sell them. And I said, well, these look like really interesting records. One of the first things I picked up was a Sly Stone album, and I went, wow. And I took a whole bunch of records off him. He sold me for 50p. I went into the Student Union bookshop, and Mike, who was running the bookshop, I said, can I put a rack of records here in your shop? So what then happened, that was next door to the ENS office, and people would come in from bands trying to talk to ENS, see the record store. I'd be there when I was supposed to be at lectures, and that's how I met Paul Boyle. So Paul came in to try and get a gig for the Vipers, and I had a chat with him, and it was before the Clash gig. And I then remember there was no guest list for the Clash gig, absolutely no guest tickets whatsoever. I think we let in Joe Breen from the Times, we had Tom McPhail, and maybe there was somebody from in Dublin. There was about 4 or 5 guests, but they were all genuine media, and they were all covering the gig, and they all went with front pages. The daily papers and evening papers went with front pages the next day, and as you mentioned, there were interviews and everything else. But that record store became a kind of channel that people could use to access us, because we were then in the office next door, and Mike could be selling the records, or I'd be there occasionally. Paul came in. I remember Adam Clayton coming in his school uniform. All kinds of people wanting, and of course you two got a lunchtime gig at the end of that 77, 78 season.
Of course, because we were running these shows in the exam hall in Trinity, which is a fairly ornate 18th century building. There was a certain amount of damage done to it, which didn't go down great with the college authorities. So after the Stranglers, well, we had a farcical outing with the Stranglers, which I particularly remember the Vipers very heroically. Anyway, the college refused us permission for 2 shows, so we ran 1 show, and in desperation we tried to use a venue called the Tivoli, which at the time was a disused cinema. It's now a hotel, of course, yeah. But that's another day's work. And anyway, young Charlie McNally, who some people will remember, the late Charlie McNally, it was one of our earlier encounters with Charlie. Anyway, he came up with the idea of using the Tivoli, so we got up there anyway and tried to clean the place up. And the Stranglers came in, had one look and said, we're fucking out of here. And so we ended up with a sold-out show of a Saturday night, 600 people outside, and so the Vipers very courageously played a free show, and we persuaded people not to fucking trash the whole place, which we just about got away with. Anyway, the the whole gig fell apart. The Stranglers, conveniently, their truck broke down on the way back from Cork, and the gig was cancelled. They were on the fucking ferry before. They were on the ferry before they even made the phone call to me, as far as I could gather. Yeah. Anyway, it dribbled on with the college authorities, and they got really pissed off with us, not surprisingly. So they introduced a noise limit. They put a decibel level on, and we had reasonably soft gigs, and then we had the Buzzcocks. College authorities came in, a man called the senior dean, and he had got engineer with him, noise meter, measured the noise and went, too loud. We were given a limit. You've broken the limit. Turn it off. And I said, I'm not fucking turning it off. I've got a crowd in here. They're going to tear the fucking place apart. So anyway, we turned it down as low as we could. No question of turning it off. So anyway, next day, phone call arrives into the student union office. You're from the man in question, the senior dean. He goes, your next show is cancelled. You've broken the agreement. And we said, okay, sorry about that. And we waited till we got the evening papers on the Monday, and Paul went to them all, and then, so we got the front page of the evening papers on the Monday, we got all the national dailies the next morning, front page, pictures, and the headline was, more or less, Chieftains considered too loud. Chieftains banned for being too loud, because the dude in question had never asked us what the next show was, so we said, next show cancelled, so we bombarded them in the papers. Of course, the college climbed down, the Chieftains played Julie, Paddy Moloney, pictures of Paddy Moloney there with his pipes on the exam hall roof, and where'd his pipes damage the exam hall? Anyway, it was a major fucking climb down for the college. It was a public relations disaster for them. Bit of a Pyrrhic victory for us because we weren't able to really run any more gigs after that, but we made our point, and that was fairly punky out.
It was very punky, and the best newspaper headline was in Trinity News, the student newspaper at the time, and it was Buzzcocks bollocksed by the board. You know, at that moment, then the adverts you had to put on in the JCR instead. Right. So you kind of, you didn't have Trinity kind of with you, but not behind you. And the guy with the decibel meter. Now this is only
Professor
in Ireland.
Luce.
Yeah,
Professor
Luce, who's there with the decibel meter.
Well, he didn't have one. He was a professor of classics.
Yeah.
So he had an engineer guy with him with an actual decibel meter. Yeah. Now, I know decibel is a Latin word.
Yes.
But don't worry. But no.
And the guy who's measuring the decibel is the European expert in Atlantis, the underwater sea, kingdom. So, you had to deal with strange things, and there was a guy called the Colonel, some guy from the British Army who used to go around Trinity, check into things. So you didn't have free reign. It wasn't like you could...
There was plenty of support at the same time.
Yeah, there was.
Because I think it's fair to say, were there not, the gigs wouldn't have happened. And I have to mention in particular as well as, of course, once I got to know and started to work with the Vipers somehow ended up with frequent support appearances to a lot of these bands. But one of the most memorable gigs
no
for me
idea
as
how
well,
that happened.
there were two shows with the Radiators in the JCR. We couldn't somehow get the exam hall, but they could fill the JCR, so they did 2 nights. And then we had the Vipers on both nights as well. And of course, the key to a gig in the JCR was you had to come from the Ents office through the fireplace to get up onto the stage. And but one of the best gigs, I have to say, musically, has to be the Buzzcocks with Revolver. And that was, I think I'm right in saying, and Phil can correct me if I'm wrong, but the first appearance by Revolver in Trinity, who were also brilliant on many occasions. But I still remember after that gig, all the Ents people, the Buzzcocks, Revolver, and Paul Charles, sitting in the dressing room off the exam hall in shock, in silence. It had been such an incredible gig. It was like the roof lifted off. It was just transformational, really special.
It actually wasn't sold out, oddly enough, yeah. It's a terrible thing to say, but you get the Buzzcocks on and you put them on, and it wasn't full, which was an awful pity. It was busy.
Yeah, but people had no money. Dublin was very.
We were charging 50 pence. I mean, the mission prices were as rock bottom as we could.
We booked the Pistols for the JCR. Pistols were booked, and the deal was we had to charge £1 a ticket. They would only play at lunchtime, and we could only announce it at 9 a.m. And then they just didn't turn up. But they were only going to play the JCR, 300 people, £1 each. That was it. So it was the only band we didn't get from that really top rank that we should have had.
That's right, because every other one of the A list of those early punk bands came to Ireland. Ross, mentioned the word revolutionary, and to me, these two people are revolutionaries because they were there. They were young, and they thought, we're going to do stuff. So again, we could go on, but thank you so much to Ian and Ross for a lovely 20 minutes. Carl. That's Ian's. Okay, well.
Not even all original equipment.
Carl, best socks of the night. Yeah, you win the socks. Yeah.
If nothing else,
You win the socks.
claim a footwear victory of
Yeah.
some sort.
Now I'm being a minder.
I wanted a riser, so that
Yeah. I'm gonna go over there inside Carl, yeah?
yeah, good point.
Sorry.
No worries. I would think so.
Hello, Mr. Boone. No singing.
Yeah. No singing in tune.
No oh, then he's all right. Yeah.
Great to see you. Can you believe it?
Stage. I've DJ'd over there, but I've never been on this stage.
About time.
I can retire now.
Having a load of
Yeah.
notes. I've got notes.
Yeah, well, you can do an hour after this. Your notes. You didn't even make an effort with the socks.
Wait a minute, Michael.
No, he's 1, 2. Okay, we're starting in 60 seconds, so if you have to have a drink, just neck it. Yeah.
The crib sheet.
Yeah. Phil's written a poem.
Yeah. Like the Rose of Tralee
Yes.
contestants.
Yeah, Phil, if you won the competition, what would you do?
The Rose of Tralee.
Yeah.
I would be gorgeous.
Well, you are.
I would be absolutely the best Rose of Tralee in the world.
World peace.
Yeah.
World peace and
Yeah.
Guinness.
If I were the Rose of Tralee, breasts would be bouncing. They are anyway.
But they, like at least one of them in the contest would be inspired by her arrival in Ireland. Yes. Like coming in out of the clouds over Shannon, seeing the vista, and she'd write a poem along the lines of, Ireland, my Ireland, where your green fields nestle beside grey stone walls.
No. Me and Dave, Michael, me and Dave think it was always Dublin.
Take your finger, you got almost like toothpaste or something.
What have you been doing backstage? No, I can't see anything.
Right hand side, chin, down, a bit harder. It's almost.
There's something for the wine.
We're eating a cake or something. Yeah, we would be drinking it. Okay, well done. Okay, Sunday night drinkers, your attention, please. Thank you. It's Sunday, and I remember when on Sunday you couldn't buy anything after noon. So we, to destroy the church, we have a shop over there. We've got our latest fanzine, because we are punks at roots, and in our fanzine, 100% of the money goes straight to the Irish Red Cross Ukraine Crisis Appeal. And Niall and myself, periodically, we just go through our record collection and we write to the people from our favourite bands, including the two guests that are about to hear, that we're going to hear from. And we just ask them, would they write to help raise money for the Red Cross about their favourite gig or about their favourite record. So in the new fanzine, Will Sargent from Echo and the Bunnymen wrote a beautiful piece for us. Members of Frankie Goes to Hollywood. And there's an incredible piece in there by a woman called Marcella Detroit, who was in Shakespeare's Sister. But before that, she was a very successful background vocalist, sang on loads of soul records.
Great song. Song.
Yeah, loads of blues records.
Great song.
And she wrote for us in our fanzine about what it was like touring with Eric Clapton and playing in Germany.
Nightmare.
And she wrote about playing in a stadium where Hitler had held one of his rallies. And she walked on that stage as a Jewish girl from Detroit, totally terrified and aware of the burden of history. But equally, she was aware that I want people to have a great time, and I want people to see that music can change, that you can absolutely bring people together for a positive reason by playing music, by that sense of solidarity. And I feel that that's the spirit that Dave brought, and that's what we're experiencing tonight. So the fanzine is available over there. It's a tenner. Some of our books are available over there as well. They're a tenner to make it easy, so do visit the shop if you can. It's a great night. I'm having a good time, but I'm also slightly disappointed, and I hope it's okay to say that. I was looking at all of you and thinking, no one made the effort tonight the way Uncle Carl did. And if any of you have a moment, I would like you to look at Carl's socks. I know times are hard and Dunn's is an easy option, or Deals, or wherever you go for your socks, but Carl made the supreme effort, and I think
Had to be done.
yeah. Okay, and now weirdly I've got Pete Holiday showing me his ankle, but yeah, next week, if anyone's not busy, we're going to do a sexy socks competition at the end of Dunleary Pier. There'll be two contestants. So well done to everyone who made an effort with the socks. Carl, because you won the socks thing, we'll start with you. You experience punk, but you're not here in Dublin. You experience it, you're in Boston at the time.
Well, yeah, I grew up in Boston, spent my teenage years in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and then back to Boston for college. And for me, it was incredibly serendipitous as a music lover, because we moved to Michigan in 1965, which was like peak music central, like it was the music capital of the United States at the time, Michigan, Detroit, and Ann Arbor. And you had Motown at its creative peak. You had all the Detroit rock and roll bands. You had blues and rhythm and blues. And the music was literally in the air. You had Bob Seger and Iggy Pop went to the high school across town from R1. We saw the MC5. I was 14. I saw them do free, like the city ran free concerts, and I saw them in a park there. You can see YouTube clips of them, and they scared the shit out of us. They were so amazing. And then back to college, back to Boston in the early 70s to 77, and we were there for the start of punk rock in New York and Boston. And so we saw Talking Heads when they were still a three-piece band, Blondie when they were still a rock and roll band. We used to so we lived in the Rat, which was Boston's equivalent of CBGB's. And we were there 4 or 5 nights a week. We saw the very first American gig that the Dam did, which was awful, and they ate pizza on stage, and the audience favored them with beer bottles at the time, yeah. But it was just an incredibly exciting time. We myself and 2 friends had a band that we never did a gig, but we had a band and rehearsed in the equivalent of the garden shed that Robert was talking about. And we would stand at the back of the club along a back wall, posing away and looking cool. And a big, tall, skinny guy with shades stood beside us, and we posing as well. And we were probably standing beside each other for 3 weeks at gigs before we finally spoke. And he asked us if we had a band, and we said we did. And we didn't have a drummer, and so we weren't doing gigs yet. And he said he had a band, but he was only doing the suburbs until they were good enough to come in and play the Rat. And about 2 weeks later, I went on my own to a gig in the Orpheum Theatre. Rick Derringer was coming up from New Jersey, and he flew up, but his support band got stuck in the snow in the winter. So they had a local band on, and lo and behold, who walks on stage but your man who was standing beside us? And it was the Cars. It was Rick Ocasek. So it was that kind of a scene. Like it was, everything was happening, and it was incredibly exciting. The Ramones did their very first gig outside New York City in Boston, and we were at that. And that was one of those life-transforming gigs, because they had a technology none of us had ever seen before, which was an electric guitar tuner. Now it was like this big, and it looked like an oscilloscope from a submarine or something. And their roadie tuned their guitars while the support band was on noodling away. And they just walked out on stage, said, "Hi, we're the Ramones, 1, 2, 3, 4. And 25 minutes and 20 songs later, they just said bye and walked off. Right? And then they did, and the way it worked was a Boston band and a New York band would play together. They would each do 2 sets a night. And then the Boston band would go to New York and they'd do the same in reverse. And so if a band did, like I say, if a New York band came and did 2 or 3 nights in Boston, they would have done 6 gigs, and they would leave behind a load of committed fans. We'd all be hooked on them. And so when the Ramones did their second set, somebody heckled them and yelled, "Ramones, go home." And they just said, "No, 1, 2, 3, 4. And literally, we were like the guy, I don't know if you remember the old ad for Sony Hi-Fi, where there's a guy in a chair and he's just literally pinned back. That's what we were like. That's what we were like, having watched the Ramones. And so it was incredibly exciting. And I wound up in Dublin by accident. I had been in Ireland in '74, met a girl, stayed a little while, and I was coming back to visit her. And I had all my friends in bands in Boston had given me records to drop into Enemy and Melody Maker and Sounds. And I just said, if there's anything in Dublin, I'll find them. And Hot Press was brand new. I think they were on issue 2 or something. So I called into the office with these records for review, and I met Bill Graham. And Bill and I started talking. We spent like 2 hours talking about music.
The legend, Bill Graham, the legend.
Yeah. And then Bill introduced me to Dave Kavanagh, who was putting on a Mink DeVille gig in the stadium. And I knew Willie DeVille, and we'd seen him loads of times. So they said, "Why don't you write about them?" So I did, and Hot Press printed it. And I said, "Whoa, this is cool." So I kept sending them articles, and they kept printing them. And then I found out you could get paid for them, which was even better. And then Niall Stokes, I was about to go home to America, and Niall said, "Are you doing anything?" And I said, "No, just hanging around."
Is Niall here tonight?
No, I don't.
He didn't make it? No? So.
Anyway, he offered me a 3-month-long job that lasted 3 years, and I've been here ever since. But the amazing thing, I guess that's a very long-winded way of saying that having seen Detroit rock and roll at its peak, punk in Boston and New York, Dublin was every bit as exciting, 77 to 80, as any of those places. It really was. And it had a unique, there was a unique edge to it, because as Ian and Ross talked about, no bands or very few bands would come to Ireland in the 70s. And if they did come, and the rare band that did come, it was either their very first gig at the start of a tour to bed the band down, or it was stuck at the end and they were tired and they didn't want to be there. But what it meant was that music fans in Dublin went to every single gig. So you could be at a Pink Floyd gig in the stadium, you could be at a Suzi Quatro gig the following week or a month later, and it would all the same people. And so therefore the influences on musicians were much more varied than you would have found in New York or London, you know, because they were much more cliquey. And so it made the Dublin bands, I think, much more interesting. And I think if you only need to listen to the Radiators to understand that, you know, that they're pulling from so many sources.
Okay, that's fascinating to me, because you're an outsider, you've got a different perspective, you've been blooded, Ann Arbor, Boston, New York, you've seen punk. But then you come here and you see that open-mindedness, you know, the bands, the young 18-year-olds who were listening, you know, Ian mentioned Planxty and that whole wave of, you know, leading up to Moving Hearts of these. Faulkner O'Callaghan once said to me that was Ireland's punk moment, was kind of 72, 73, where the trad bands went electric.
Oh, no. I disagree, because I got dragged up to the Meeting House one time to watch a folk gig, and it was the most po-faced bullshit I'd ever sat through. Seriously, it was like each act would say, well, here's a song I learned from a really old lady living on a mountain. And then it was, here's a song I learned from an even older man living on an even taller mountain. And then if anybody enjoyed themselves, they would be literally told, shut up, don't clap, don't enjoy the gig. You know, we're all very serious musicians here. And it was crap. And I just said, I am never going back to that place again, you know?
Fantastic.
And so it to me, it was the arrival of all of these guys.
Okay.
Kind of and it was like somebody had knocked a valve off a pressure cooker and everything came out all at once. Yeah.
Okay, and that's another good point. And, you know, in terms of Ross, for example, a lot of the people you'll hear from the scene, they weren't just fans or they weren't just in bands. They started putting on gigs. They started writing. They started doing graphic design. And in your case, where did the graphic design, did you do the Blades?
Yeah, I did the Blades.
Did you do
logo.
Freebird?
I did the Freebird logo, the Rhythm Kings album sleeves, which is, you know, with Dave in them, obviously I did most of their record sleeves. I learned that, basically I learned the graphic design on the job in Hot Press, because Hot Press was so small and poor that everybody had 2 jobs at least. And mine were writing and proofreading is just so boring. So I thought that the 2 lads who were doing the layouts looked like they were having more fun. So I kind of wheedled my way in there and picked it up that way. And then I was friends with Steve Averill, who of course is the world-class graphic designer. So I learned a lot from just watching and stealing, you know, yeah. But it was that exciting time, because everything was punky, everything was do-it-yourself, everything was, you know, pilfer from all sources, and you know, you can use this and you can use that and you can bend this and you can stick a funny face on top of that figure, and you know, it was all connected and all a byproduct of that, I think. Yeah.
Fantastic. Phil, you're from Dublin. You grew up in Dublin.
Crumlin.
Before punk. So where did music come into? Like, were you from a musical family? Were you going to see gigs before punk?
My dad, God rest his soul, my dad was, I remember being in Galtimore Road at my auntie Maggie's, and my dad sang Boule of Vogue, you know, and he sang Boule of Vogue, and he had this brilliant tenor voice. And I sat there and I went, oh my God, wow. And it suddenly made me realize that my dad was a brilliant singer, you know. And it came out of nowhere, you know. And then I bought a guitar. My dad bought me a guitar. My mum and dad bought me a guitar. I couldn't play it. I still can't play guitar, as people say. We just started writing. I just didn't think I'd be a writer, but then I had these words in my head, and I just started writing shit down. You know what I mean? So it's like, so you know, that's what happened. You know, so, and I'm a very lucky person because I'm still in the music business. So I'm very lucky.
Yeah, so you get the guitar, you're surrounded by music, and you're writing lyrics. How do you get to be in a band? Like, what was the scene like for
Johnny
you?
Sullivan? Johnny Sullivan, who I spoke to when Johnny Sullivan was a drummer in Revolver, and he used to live in Tala. And Pete knows all these guys, you know, and Kevin Helly and the original members of Revolver, and the late great Billy Morley. Billy Morley was my hero. Billy Morley, for anyone who doesn't know, he was like a superhero. You know who I'm talking about. He was just like
Billy was the guitarist in Revolver.
And
then played with the Rads.
joined the Radiators. And Billy Morley was like, honestly, if you see Billy Morley, he was like the rock star.
He was Ireland's Mick Ronson as a reference point. Yeah.
Seriously, he was so good looking. He had everything, Billy. You know, and I managed to share a stage with him. So I'm very, very lucky, you know. So, but Billy, when we wrote songs, and I remember sitting with him, and we. And we wrote a song about condoms, and me and Billy were sitting, and his wife Rita, and she was giving us our cups of tea and everything. But we wrote a song called Louie Louie about condoms. So it's like you flushed all your love down the Louie Louie. Contraception guaranteed, it floats out to the sea. Me and Billy wrote that song, you know. So it's like. Just crazy stuff, you know. So, but Billy Morley was a genius, and that's where it all kind of came from. Billy inspired me. I didn't know I wanted to be a lead singer, but all of a sudden I grew into it, you know. So, and listen, here we are now, you know. So I'm not a show off at all, you know. So.
Yeah. Very shy and quiet. So Revolver was literally your first band.
No, I was in a band called Chevrolet. That was like a real stupid covers band, and I didn't know what was going on with it. And then Kevin Helly and Johnny Sullivan, you know all about this, you know, said we need a singer, and then I was like, I can't sing, you know. So, but so Kevin Helly and Billy Morley and Johnny Sullivan and me formed Revolver. So. We did pretty damn good, by the way, you know.
Yeah, and you got gigs very, very early on. Like, how did you get those gigs, or was it
really difficult? Smiley Bodger was a great help. We got gigs in Morons. People know again, you know. So, but it was really, really hard. Revolver got us a residency in the Spinning Wheel. So it's a Spinning Wheel was like, you know, and we ended up in the Sunday World, and there was somebody cut their hand at the gig. Somebody cut their hand, and it was like, you know, it was in the front page of the Sunday World, and everyone was going, "Oh my God, these punks are all over the place. They're terrible," you know. And my mummy said, and she said, "Philip, you're on the front page of the Sunday World. What's going on?" You know, so I was like, "It's all right, Mummy, you know, it's all right," you know. So, but it was like.
Does anyone remember that? Like the Sunday World, that's
horrible paper,
yeah,
horrible paper.
But the Sunday World sensation, as the Radiators put it, and there was a a young fella called Anto who used to wear a white boiler suit and went to gigs, and he was at the Revolver gig, and it was messing, and his hand got cut, and the Sunday World took the photo, and it was members of the Dublin
Front page.
Yeah, front page, members of the Dublin punk cult cover themselves in blood.
Honestly,
in a
like,
ritual.
So think of the news in the world now. It was like the biggest thing in the fucking Ireland. It was like, I was on the front page and my mum was going, Philip, what the fucking... And she always said, Philip with the full words, I'm going, it's all right, Mammy, it's all right, Mammy, so... You know what you always want to please your mommy, so... She was going crazy.
The Sunday World had another front page, which the headline I can still remember was Punk Rock Band Shock Convent. And a band was playing a school dance or something, and they offered a bottle of Blue Nun to the head nun. Right. In a beautiful piece of symmetry. Yeah. That was
in Donegal.
That was front page news.
Yeah.
We used to rehearse in the convent at St. Bernadette's Church in Crumlin. St. Bernadette's, in St. Bernadette's Church, we rehearsed with Revolver in the back of it, and the nuns were really, really nice. They were really cool, by the way, so they really loved it, so anyway.
Well, they're afraid of the cult, they're afraid that you'd cut their hands off. But, to me, Revolver weren't punk in the sense of the Clash. So many of the bands, and I include the Vipers, were more inspired by the mod look, by the jam, by that brilliant power pop idea. Carl, were you seeing that in Dublin, when you were going to see these really great bands?
Yeah, in fact, as my memory is that there weren't any really hardcore punk bands in Dublin at the time. They actually came later.
We certainly weren't a hardcore punk band.
And I think
because when Pete and Eamon and I, we all got together. We were writing songs, and Private World is like a really brilliant song, but it's not a punk song, So
no, it's much more new wave, I think.
Yeah,
from
correct,
if you want to stick a label on, probably much more new wave. But I think almost all of the bands were like that. If you looked at the Fabrics and the Sinners and a lot of the other bands that were knocking around, and especially the Vipers, Revolver, and the Rads were already gone at that point. But the hardcore stuff really did come later. Like I think it probably maybe post 1980 or 82 even. But it focused around Advanced Records on King Street. But they were definitely later, and therefore were to us oddballs, But again, I think it circles back to what I said about the Dublin musicians having so many varied influences. That the music they were making was
I remember writing a song called Bomb Scare Thoroughfare, which is about the troubles in the north, and it was a song called Bomb Scare Thoroughfare, and I remember writing the lyrics for it, and take a walk down Bomb Scare Thoroughfare, see all the people that walk down there, and it was a peace song. It was trying to make peace, but it was like, take a walk down Bomb Scare Thoroughfare, because you were gonna go walking down. You could get blown up in any second, So, but I mean, I've got to say, I'm very proud of those lyrics, So, Bomb Scare Thoroughfare. So it's a great lyric, So in my opinion, so.
Yeah, and that's the really interesting thing about punk. And Carl, you mentioned that it's not until Paranoid Visions and Napalm Sunday, like really hardcore punk DIY punk bands, that classic punk look comes in Irish history. But there's a load of glam rock influence. And I can't be in a room.
Oh yeah,
yeah. I can't be in a room with Pete Holiday without mentioning, that glam rock, and you mentioned, Bowie and his band, and that filtered through into Irish music to T-Rex, absolutely, but also Sweet and Slade and Bolan. But if any of you get a chance, the new Pete Holiday stuff is
Absolutely incredible.
Probably the best thing he's ever done. Yeah.
But then again, I'd say that, Pete, I'd say that it is brilliant, but then the reason stuff is pretty damn good as well. Yeah. The reason stuff is pretty damn good. So Eamon and myself and Danton Supple, who is Coldplay's producer, he's very much involved in the reasons. He's, as I say, Danton Supple, huge name, and so we're going to get all this sort of sorted out in the next 6 months with Pete, and so we're going to get this released in the next year or so. So honestly, we've got some. You never stop writing. You never stop. You know that, Pete. You know, so when you never stop writing, you just keep going. You just keep going. Why should I stop writing songs? Why should I? No way I should stop writing. I'm going to keep going. So, you know.
No, and that's a very good point.
It's a passion.
It's a very good point. And isn't it funny that we're at this stage in our lives, and that we can now say Sunday night is all right for fighting? Because I get the feeling it's going to start kicking off. Can I just really thank Robert for making this.
Michael,
and to all of the Maloneys,
Michael, can I just say some things about Dave from me? So, me and Dave were the greatest friends since we met in Moran's, and when Billy Morley was thrown up backstage when Revolver were about to go on stage. Billy Morley was thrown up.
Stage fright.
Yeah, he was getting sick. Billy Morley got sick every time we were going on stage. So Dave came out and said, "Oh, okay, what's happening there?" You know, so it's like, you know, so. And then Dave and I became the greatest of friends. And Dave was working in Murray's Rent-A-Car down in Bagot Street Bridge. I was working in Birchall's Advertising at that time. And we were both in bands, and we just didn't know what was going on. We didn't know our lives, you know, so. And then I moved to O'Keefe's Advertising, and we used to go to, the first thing that happened was we went to Toners. When we started going to Toners, it all changed, because music came in, you know, so it was like, you know, Dave Moloney was one of the greatest persons I have ever known in my life.
I've one Dave story that he told me, that when the Vipers first went across to London, Paul, of course, many of you I'm sure know this, that Paul's older brother Billy Boyle was a very successful stage actor and a bit of television. And when they went over, Paul stayed in Billy's posh apartment, but the rest of the lads slept on park benches in Hyde Park. So that's what they were doing at the time. Literally, they were sleeping on park benches while Paul was enjoying the luxury of his brother's apartment. So that's, you know, that's kind of what it was like for bands. It wasn't all glamour.
No. And these people worked. So thank you to all of the speakers tonight. I can say it personally, you changed my life. I think you changed Ireland's culture. You know, it was an honour to be asked by Robert and the family to be part of this celebration. Also want to thank Whelans, who've been incredibly decent and just easy to work with. So thank you to everyone for being here, and good night.